The 58th floor of Harrington Innovations gleamed with the sterile perfection of success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of downtown San Francisco, the morning sun painting golden streaks across the polished marble and glass interior. For most, this view represented aspiration. For James Harrington, it was simply his birthright. James adjusted his custom Tom Ford tie as he strode through the executive floor, employees parting before him like the Red Sea. At 32, he carried himself with the practiced confidence of someone who had never truly failed at anything significant. 6 feet tall, with dark hair, perpetually styled to look carelessly perfect, sharp blue eyes that rarely missed details, and a jawline that advertising executives would kill for. He was the picture of privilege, and he knew it. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," his executive assistant called as he passed. He nodded without breaking stride. "Calendar update, Diane. Board meeting at 11. Lunch with the Mercer account at 1. Your father wants to see you in his office. He said," and I quote, "immediately." James paused mid-step. Robert Harrington, founder and CEO of Harrington Innovations, didn't summon people without reason, and immediately from his father was never good news. Did he mention why? "No, sir." Diane's expression suggested she knew more than she was saying. "Just that it's important." James sighed. "Fine. Hold my calls." The walk to his father's corner office felt longer than usual. James mentally reviewed his recent projects, searching for any potential problems. The Singapore expansion was ahead of schedule. The new AI platform had exceeded beta testing expectations. His personal conduct had been impeccable, at least publicly. He rapped twice on his father's door before entering. Robert Harrington sat behind a massive walnut desk, silver hair contrasting with a perpetually tanned face, the result of weekend sailing excursions rather than any salon. At 65, he remained as formidable as the day he'd built Harrington Innovations from a garage startup into a tech empire. "James, sit." Robert gestured to the chair across from him. James remained standing. "I've got the quarterly projections to finalize before the board meeting." "What's this about?" Robert's expression hardened. "I said sit." James complied, crossing one leg over the other and affecting an air of casual disinterest that he knew irritated his father. "The board and I have been discussing succession planning," Robert began. James straightened slightly. Finally. After years of proving himself, of graduating top of his class at Stanford, of working his way through every department despite knowing he could have started at the top, the conversation was happening. "About time," James said, allowing himself a small smile. "I've already drafted some initial thoughts on the transition timeline. I think a 6-month, you're not ready." 3 words. Like bullets, they struck with precision. "Excuse me?" James uncrossed his legs, leaning forward. "I've been preparing for this my entire life. The Singapore expansion alone increased our market share by 15%. I've personally You've secured accounts because your last name is Harrington," Robert cut in. "You've never had to struggle for anything, never had to innovate from necessity rather than boredom." James felt heat rising in his neck. "That's not fair. You've worked in a golden cage," Robert interrupted again. "The board agrees. You understand our products, our market position, our clients. What you don't understand is people. Specifically, people who don't live in your privileged bubble." "This is absurd," James said, standing now. "If this is about the Westlake merger—" "This is about ensuring the company survives beyond me," Robert said, his voice rising slightly. "About making sure my son doesn't run it into the ground because he thinks everyone who earns less than 6 figures is just lazy or stupid." The accusation hung in the air between them. James opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. His father wasn't entirely wrong. James did believe in meritocracy. If you were smart and worked hard, you succeeded. It wasn't his fault if others didn't apply themselves. "So what's your solution?" James finally asked, his tone carefully controlled. Send me to volunteer at a soup kitchen, perhaps a corporate retreat with motivational speakers about empathy? Robert's weathered face broke into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Nothing so dramatic. I'm assigning you to the Nexus project. James blinked. The Community College Initiative, that's a PR stunt. It's a $20 million investment in developing tech talent from underserved communities, Robert corrected, and it's your new priority for the next 3 months. You can't be serious. That's Jennifer's department. Corporate social responsibility is... Jennifer will continue to oversee the program. You'll be working on a specific pilot project with one of the new interns. James stared at his father in disbelief. You're demoting me to babysit an intern. The board meeting is in 2 hours. And you'll announce your exciting new focus on developing diverse talent pipelines, Robert finished for him. The board already approves. James ran a hand through his perfect hair, momentarily disrupting it. This is punishment for something. What did I do? Robert sighed, suddenly looking his age. This isn't punishment, James. It's education. I built this company from nothing. I knew hunger, real hunger. I knew what it meant to have the electricity cut off because I couldn't pay the bill. Those experiences informed how I built this company, how I treated people, how I saw opportunities others missed. He gestured around them. You've never known any of that, and it shows. In what way? James demanded, genuinely confused. The Davidson account, James frowned. We landed that deal. After you nearly lost it by dismissing the concerns of their head of operations, a woman who worked her way up from the factory floor over 20 years. You called her objections unsophisticated in the meeting. Her concerns were based on outdated methodologies. I was direct. You were arrogant, Robert corrected, and you didn't even realize it. That's the problem. James fell silent, his mind racing for a way out of this situation. The intern starts today, Robert continued, sliding a folder across the desk. Lucia Mendoza, 24, community college transfer to Berkeley, computer science major with a minor in business, top of her class. Her project proposal for our community hackathon caught Jennifer's eye. James didn't take the folder. So she's your charity case of the month, Robert's eyes flashed. That attitude right there is why you're doing this. Ms. Mendoza earned her spot through merit and determination, facing obstacles you can't imagine. You will treat her with respect. Fine, James said tightly. I'll meet with her once a week, sign off on whatever little project she's working on, and you'll work with her directly, daily. You'll share your office. My office? James nearly shouted. That's completely non-negotiable, Robert finished. Consider this your most important project to date, James, because how you handle it will determine your future at this company. The threat wasn't veiled. For the first time, James felt a flutter of genuine concern. His father had never interfered with his career trajectory before. And if I refuse? Robert's expression was granite. Then the board will be looking at external candidates for the succession plan. The silence that followed was deafening. James could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant sounds of the city below. 3 months, James finally said, his voice controlled. And then we reassess. Robert nodded once. She'll be here at 10. I suggest you clear your schedule and read her file. James snatched the folder from the desk and turned to leave. One more thing, Robert called after him. This isn't just about teaching you empathy, though God knows you could use it. Miss Mendoza has exceptional potential. Don't underestimate her because of where she comes from. James didn't respond as he yanked open the door and left. Lucia Mendoza stepped out of the overcrowded bus onto Market Street, clutching her worn messenger bag closer as the crisp September wind whipped around the skyscrapers. At 24, she'd learned to present confidence she didn't always feel, especially on days like today. She paused to check her reflection in a store window, dark curly hair pulled back into a professional-looking ponytail. Minimal makeup. The pantsuit she'd saved for months to buy from a consignment shop looked almost new, and no one would know she'd spent an hour last night fixing a loose button and steaming out wrinkles. "You belong here," she whispered to herself, a ritual she'd performed before every important milestone since leaving her grandmother's small apartment in the Mission District. "You earned this." The Harrington Innovations building loomed ahead, a gleaming tower of glass and steel stretching toward the clouds. Lucia took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She'd beaten out hundreds of applicants for this internship. Her project proposal had impressed the selection committee. She had nothing to prove to anyone except herself. The security guard at the entrance checked her ID, handing her a temporary badge. "First day?" he asked kindly, noting her barely concealed nervousness. Lucia nodded, offering a small smile. "That obvious, huh? You've got that 'please don't let me screw this up' look." He winked. "You'll be fine. Jennifer from HR usually brings the new folks up. She's good people." "Thanks," Lucia said, feeling slightly calmer. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor gave her time to review her mental checklist. The orientation email had mentioned meeting her supervisor today, though it hadn't specified who that would be. She'd researched the company extensively, memorizing the executive team, recent projects, and company history. Knowledge was armor, her grandmother always said. The elevator doors opened to reveal a stylishly modern reception area. A woman with a sleek bob and a friendly smile approached. "Lucia Mendoza, I'm Jennifer Chen, Director of Community Outreach and Talent Development." She extended her hand. "Welcome to Harrington Innovations." Lucia shook her hand firmly. "Thank you for this opportunity, Ms. Chen, I'm excited to get started." "Call me Jennifer, please. We're thrilled to have you join us. Your proposal for using AI to improve accessibility in education technology was impressive. Very innovative approach to a real-world problem." Lucia felt a flush of pride. "My younger brother has dyslexia. The standard tools available to his school were lacking. And that personal connection drove you to create something better." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we're trying to cultivate with the Nexus project." She led Lucia through a series of hallways, pointing out various departments. Lucia tried not to gawk at the sleek design, the cutting-edge technology visible everywhere, the casual display of success. "We've made a slight change to your internship structure," Jennifer said as they walked. "You'll be working directly with one of our executives on developing your project proposal into a potential product." Lucia's pulse quickened. "I wasn't expecting that level of involvement from the executive team." Jennifer's smile tightened slightly. "It's a new initiative. We're pairing promising talent with senior leadership for mutual benefit." Something in her tone suggested there was more to the story, but before Lucia could ask, they arrived at a large corner office with a breathtaking view of the bay. "This is where you'll be working," Jennifer said, gesturing to a newly installed desk near the window. Lucia blinked in confusion. "I'm sharing an executive's office? Is that normal?" "Not typically, no." Jennifer lowered her voice. "Look, I should give you a heads up. You'll be working with James Harrington, the CFO, the founder's son." Lucia felt a wave of panic. She'd read about James Harrington in her company research, Stanford MBA, financial wunderkind, rumored next CEO, and according to the tech blogs, notoriously demanding and impatient. Jennifer nodded. "He's brilliant, and you'll learn a tremendous amount from him, but he can be challenging." "Challenging how?" Jennifer seemed to choose her next words carefully. "Let's just say he has high standards and limited patience. Don't let him intimidate you. You earned your place here." Before Lucia could process this information, the office door swung open. James Harrington strode in, absorbed in something on his phone. He was taller than his photos suggested, impeccably dressed in what Lucia suspected was a suit that cost more than her yearly rent. "Mr. Harrington," Jennifer called, her professional smile back in place. "This is Lucia Mendoza, the Nexus project intern you'll be mentoring." James looked up, his eyes flicking over Lucia in a quick assessment that felt uncomfortably like being scanned by a barcode reader. His expression remained neutral, but Lucia didn't miss the slight tightening around his mouth. "Ms. Mendoza," he said with practiced politeness, extending his hand. "Welcome to Harrington Innovations." His handshake was firm, brief, and impersonal. Up close, Lucia could see the perfect tailoring of his suit, smell the subtle notes of expensive cologne. Every detail about him screamed privilege and power. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm looking forward to working with you." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she hadn't been intimidated, or maybe annoyance at the same. "Jennifer, could I have a word?" James asked, not waiting for a response before stepping back into the hallway. Jennifer gave Lucia an encouraging smile. "Why don't you get settled? Your system should be ready to go. HR sent up the access credentials this morning." As they stepped outside, Lucia could hear their lowered voices, though not the exact words. The tone told her enough. James Harrington was not happy about this arrangement. She took a deep breath and moved to the desk that had been set up for her. It was positioned in a way that made it clear it was temporary, not quite in the corner, but not directly facing James's massive desk either. An awkward afterthought in a space that clearly wasn't designed for sharing. Lucia set down her bag and turned to look out at the view. The city spread below her, including the neighborhood where she'd grown up, where her grandmother still lived in the same two-bedroom apartment they'd shared with Lucia's brother after their parents died. "I belong here," she whispered again, hearing the door open as James returned alone. He walked to his desk without acknowledging her, sitting down and immediately focusing on his computer screen. After an uncomfortable silence, Lucia decided to take the initiative. "I understand we'll be working on developing my education technology proposal," she said, keeping her voice professional and confident despite her racing heart. "I've prepared some initial development pathways based on the feedback from the selection committee." James didn't look up from his screen. "I have a board meeting in an hour. We'll discuss your project tomorrow." The dismissal was clear, but Lucia stood her ground. "Of course. In the meantime, perhaps you could point me toward any existing accessibility initiatives the company has undertaken. I'd like to make sure my approach aligns with—" "Ms. Mendoza," James interrupted, finally looking at her. "I understand you're eager to begin. That's commendable, but today is not ideal for onboarding. Jennifer should have scheduled this for tomorrow." Lucia felt her cheeks warm with a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. "I apologize for the inconvenience of my existence, Mr. Harrington," she said before she could stop herself. "I'll try to be less disruptive while occupying the space that was assigned to me." His eyebrows rose fractionally, the only indication he was surprised by her response. "I don't have an issue with your existence, Ms. Mendoza," he said after a moment. "Just its timing. And since we're going to be working together for the foreseeable future, you should know I prefer direct communication over passive aggression." "Noted," Lucia replied coolly. "In the spirit of direct communication, then, do you actually have any interest in the project I've proposed, or am I just your assigned community service for the quarter?" James's expression shifted, something like reluctant respect flickering across his features. "That," he said, "is a question better addressed after I've had a chance to thoroughly review your proposal, which I intend to do after my board meeting." He stood, straightening his already perfect tie. "Make yourself familiar with the building. Get your security clearance sorted. I'll have Diane, my assistant, show you to the cafeteria. We'll reconvene at 2. Without waiting for her response, he gathered his tablet and a portfolio, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Ms. Mendoza," he added, "the selection committee had hundreds of applications. Yours was the only one that proposed a solution rather than identifying a problem. That's rare." With that, he was gone, leaving Lucia standing alone in his massive office, unsure if she'd just received a compliment or simply an observation. Outside, James strode toward the boardroom, his mind racing. His father's directive was clear: work with the intern, learn something about people without silver spoons, secure his position as heir apparent. Simple enough. Except Lucia Mendoza was not what he'd expected. He'd anticipated either cowering deference or chip-on-the-shoulder defensiveness. Her calm confidence, even when pushing back against his dismissal, suggested neither. For the first time in recent memory, James felt slightly off balance. It wasn't an entirely unpleasant sensation, but it was definitely unfamiliar. "Interesting," he murmured to himself as he entered the boardroom, nodding to the assembled executives. Whatever game his father was playing, perhaps it wouldn't be the complete waste of time he'd feared. Back in the office, Lucia sank into her chair, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The encounter could have gone worse, she supposed. At least he seemed to have actually read her proposal. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. "How's the first day going, Mija?" Lucia smiled, typing back, "Just getting started. The view is amazing. My supervisor is challenging." The three dots appeared immediately, followed by her grandmother's response. "You've never backed down from a challenge in your life. Show them what a Mendoza can do." Lucia tucked her phone away, squaring her shoulders as she turned on her computer. James Harrington might have been born with every advantage, but she'd fought for each opportunity. If he thought she'd be easily intimidated or dismissed, he was about to learn a valuable lesson. Game on. James returned to his office at precisely 2 o'clock, having strategically extended his lunch meeting to avoid spending more time than necessary with his new office mate. He paused outside the door, straightening his already impeccable tie, a nervous habit he'd developed during his first year at Stanford. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door, prepared to find Lucia Mendoza idly waiting or perhaps scrolling through social media like most interns he'd encountered. Instead, he found her in deep conversation with Arjun Patel, the company's notoriously reclusive head of engineering. "The neural network approach is interesting," Arjun was saying, gesturing to something on Lucia's screen. "But have you considered using a hybrid model? The processing requirements would be significantly lower for schools with limited technology budgets." Lucia nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what I was thinking. If we can shift some of the processing to local devices rather than requiring constant cloud connectivity, we could reduce latency and address privacy concerns simultaneously," Arjun finished, looking genuinely impressed. James cleared his throat and both heads turned toward him. "Mr. Harrington," Arjun straightened, "I was just discussing Ms. Mendoza's project. Very promising work." "I'm sure," James replied neutrally. "Though I wasn't aware you had scheduled a meeting with our engineering department, Ms. Mendoza." Lucia met his gaze directly. "I didn't. I went to the cafeteria as you suggested, and Mr. Patel was kind enough to join me when he overheard me reviewing my notes. He offered some valuable insights." Arjun, looking slightly uncomfortable at the tension, nodded. "She's tackled a real problem in educational technology. I've got a nephew with similar challenges. The current tools are inadequate at best." James forced a polite smile. "Well, I won't keep you, Arjun. I'm sure you have more pressing matters than our intern program." "Actually, I'd be interested in—" Arjun began. "We have a quarterly review next week," James interrupted smoothly. "Perhaps we can discuss potential collaborations then." The dismissal was clear. Arjun glanced between them, then nodded. "Of course. Miss Mendoza, feel free to email me those research papers we discussed." "Thank you, Mr. Patel. I appreciate your time," Lucia replied with genuine warmth. After Arjun left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the office. James walked to his desk, setting down his portfolio with deliberate calmness. "Making friends already, I see," he remarked, his tone carefully neutral. "Is that a problem?" Lucia asked, her expression equally composed. "I thought networking was encouraged." James studied her for a moment. Most interns would be apologizing by now, flustered by his implied disapproval. Lucia Mendoza simply waited for his response, neither defensive nor intimidated. "Networking is essential," he finally said, sitting down. But there are protocols. Arjun Patel oversees 16 major development teams. His time is valuable. All the more reason I should appreciate him sharing it, Lucia replied evenly. And for what it's worth, he approached me. James felt his irritation rising, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Was it her calm self-assurance, the fact that she'd somehow charmed one of the company's most social executives within hours of arriving? Or was it something else? Perhaps the uncomfortable awareness that she didn't seem to need his guidance at all. "Let's review your project," he said, changing the subject. "I've gone through your proposal more thoroughly." Lucia's expression brightened with genuine enthusiasm. "What do you think?" James pulled up the file on his tablet. "Your core concept is sound. Adaptive learning interfaces for students with processing disorders is an underserved market. Your approach to using predictive algorithms to customize text presentation is innovative." He paused, watching her carefully. "However, your implementation strategy lacks commercial viability. You've focused entirely on the humanitarian aspects without addressing monetization or scalability." Lucia's brow furrowed slightly. The proposal was for a non-profit educational initiative. The Nexus project guidelines specifically mentioned solving community problems. "Harrington Innovations is not a charity, Ms. Mendoza," James replied. "Even our community initiatives must demonstrate potential return on investment. Whether financial or in terms of technological advancement, we can apply elsewhere. So helping dyslexic kids read better isn't valuable unless we can profit from it," Lucia challenged, a flash of fire in her eyes. James leaned back slightly. "That's not what I said. Sustainability requires viability. If we create a solution that schools can't afford to implement, or that drains resources without generating support for continued development, how many students will it actually help?" Lucia opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, considering his point. "Fair enough," she conceded after a moment, "but I reject the premise that profitability and accessibility are mutually exclusive." "They're not," James agreed, surprised by her willingness to consider his critique rather than becoming defensive. "That's precisely my point. We need to develop your concept with both in mind." He turned his tablet around, showing her a series of notes and diagrams he'd made. "I've outlined 3 potential development paths. The first focuses on direct licensing to school districts, with tiered pricing based on district funding levels. The second explores a foundation-sponsored model with corporate underwriting. The third, which I think has the most potential, is a freemium structure where basic functionality is available to all, while advanced features and customizations generate revenue from private schools and higher education institutions." Lucia leaned forward, her eyes scanning his notes with intense focus. James found himself watching her reaction more closely than he'd intended. Her dark eyebrows drew together in concentration, her lips moving slightly as she processed the information. "The freemium model could work," she said finally, looking up. "But we'd need to ensure the free version still provides genuine value, not just a teaser that frustrates users into paying." "Agreed," James said, somewhat surprised by how quickly she'd grasped the business implications. "That's where we'd need to determine the core functionality threshold." "And what about families who can't afford the premium features but need them?" Lucia pressed. "My brother's school couldn't even afford up-to-date textbooks." James considered this. Scholarship program? Or perhaps a community sponsorship model where businesses can donate licenses to under-resourced schools? Lucia's expression softened slightly. "That could actually work." She pulled her laptop closer. "I've been working on some preliminary interface mock-ups this morning. Maybe we could integrate these considerations into the design phase from the beginning." As she turned her screen toward him, James was genuinely impressed by what he saw. The interface was elegant, intuitive, and clearly designed with real users in mind. Most concepts at this stage were rough sketches, but Lucia had created something that looked almost production-ready. "You did this today?" he asked, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. She nodded, a hint of pride breaking through her professional demeanor. "I've been thinking about this project for over a year. The internship application just gave me the push to formalize it." For the next hour, they worked with an unexpected synergy. James pointed out potential business challenges. Lucia countered with user-focused solutions. He identified market segments. She highlighted accessibility concerns he hadn't considered. Their back and forth had a rhythm that felt strangely natural, despite their vastly different perspectives. "We should schedule a preliminary meeting with the product development team," James said, checking his watch with surprise when he realized how much time had passed. "And we'll need to run some cost projections before presenting to—" He was interrupted by a knock at the door. His father stood in the doorway, observing them with undisguised interest. "Am I interrupting?" Robert asked, though his tone suggested he had no intention of leaving regardless of the answer. James straightened immediately. "Dad, we were just reviewing Ms. Mendoza's project scope." "Mr. Harrington," Lucia said, standing quickly and extending her hand. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." Robert's weathered face broke into a warm smile as he shook her hand. "The honor is mine, Ms. Mendoza. Your proposal impressed everyone on the selection committee. I'm particularly interested in your approach to cognitive accessibility." Lucia blinked, clearly surprised that the CEO had not only read her proposal, but remembered the details. "Thank you, sir. It's a personal passion of mine." "The best innovations usually begin that way," Robert agreed. "And how are you finding your first day with us? I understand my son has been showing you the ropes." James tensed slightly at the pointed question. "It's been illuminating," Lucia replied diplomatically. "Mr. Harrington has provided valuable perspective on the commercial viability aspects of the project." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Has he now? How unexpected!" James felt his jaw tighten. "We were just discussing potential development paths, including a freemium model with community sponsorship options." "Freemium with community sponsorship," Robert repeated, giving his son a curious look. "That sounds remarkably conscientious." "It was a collaborative idea," James said stiffly. Robert's gaze moved between them, his expression unreadable. "Well, don't let me interrupt your momentum. I just wanted to welcome Ms. Mendoza personally and make sure she was settling in." "Everyone has been very welcoming," Lucia assured him. "Especially Mr. Patel from engineering. He had some excellent suggestions about processing architecture." "You've met Arjun already?" Robert looked impressed. He rarely emerges from his department for anyone, let alone on their first day. He gave James a significant look that clearly said, "See what I mean about her?" James resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "We were actually in the middle of discussing next steps, Dad." Of course," Robert said, moving toward the door. "Ms. Mendoza, we have a company tradition of Friday afternoon gatherings on the rooftop garden. Nothing formal, just a chance for teams to mingle. I hope you'll join us this week." "I'd be delighted, sir," Lucia replied with a genuine smile. "Excellent. James can show you where it is." With a final pointed look at his son, Robert left, closing the door behind him. The silence that followed felt loaded. James turned back to his computer, inexplicably annoyed. "My father seems quite impressed with you." "He seems very hands-on for a CEO," Lucia observed carefully. James snorted. "Only when it serves his purposes." Lucia tilted her head slightly. "And what purpose does taking an interest in an intern serve?" The directness of the question caught James off guard. Most employees would never dare to probe into the family dynamics of the Harringtons. "My father believes in developing talent," he said finally, offering the public relations version of the truth. "He started this company with nothing but his own ingenuity and hard work. He values those qualities in others." Lucia studied him for a moment too long, as if she could sense the omissions in his answer. "And what do you value, Mr. Harrington?" The question hung between them, unexpectedly personal. James found himself momentarily at a loss for words. a rare occurrence for someone who prided himself on always having the right response ready. Efficiency, he said finally. Precision. Results. Not people? Lucia asked, her voice neutral but her gaze direct. James felt a flicker of defensiveness. People are complex, unpredictable, emotional. Those qualities make them innovative but also inefficient. And yet, without people, who would care about the results? Lucia challenged gently. Before James could formulate a response, his phone buzzed with a message from Diane. Urgent call from Singapore investors, line 2. Saved by the bell, he thought with relief. I need to take this call. Why don't you continue developing those interface mock-ups? We can reconvene tomorrow morning. Lucia nodded, turning back to her laptop. Of course, Mr. Harrington. James, he found himself saying, surprising both of them. If we're going to be sharing an office for 3 months, Mr. Harrington will become tedious. A small smile touched her lips. All right, James, I'm Lucia. He nodded once, then picked up his phone, oddly unsettled by the brief moment of connection. This is Harrington, he said into the receiver, deliberately turning away from her. As he immersed himself in the call, discussing projections and timelines with the Singapore team, he remained acutely aware of Lucia's presence across the room. There was something about her that commanded attention even when she was silent, a quality he'd previously only recognized in his father and a few of the most successful entrepreneurs he'd encountered. The afternoon stretched into evening. James ended his call to find Lucia still working diligently, completely absorbed in her task. Most of the office had emptied, the golden light of sunset streaming through the windows. It's after 7, he noted, surprised she was still there. Lucia looked up, equally surprised. Is it? I lost track of time. Do you need a ride home? The offer slipped out before he could consider it. She seemed momentarily taken aback by the unexpected courtesy. No, thank you. I take the bus. The bus? James repeated, trying to hide his distaste. At this hour? Lucia's expression cooled slightly. Some of us do that, you know. Use public transportation. It's this radical concept where people from different socioeconomic backgrounds share communal vehicles to reduce traffic and carbon emissions. James felt his cheeks warm at her gentle mockery. I'm aware of the concept and its benefits. I was concerned about safety, not status. I've been taking the bus since I was 12, she replied, gathering her things. I think I can manage. 12. Despite himself, James was curious. Your parents allowed that? A shadow crossed Lucia's face. My parents died when I was 10. My grandmother raised me and my brother. And yes, she allowed it, because she was working 2 jobs and couldn't drive us everywhere. James felt a rare pang of discomfort, recognizing he'd stumbled into personal territory. I'm sorry about your parents. Lucia nodded once, accepting the condolence without elaboration. I should get going. My grandmother expects me for dinner. First-day celebration. Of course, James said, strangely reluctant to end the conversation. We made good progress today. We did, she agreed, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Your business perspective was helpful. I hadn't considered some of those angles. And your user-focused approach highlighted gaps in my thinking, James admitted, surprising himself with the acknowledgement. They regarded each other for a moment, both seemingly unsure how to end the day. Well, Lucia said finally, I'll see you tomorrow. James, tomorrow, he echoed, watching as she walked to the door. Lucia. She paused, looking back with a small smile that transformed her serious face into something unexpectedly luminous. Thanks for not being as awful as I feared. Before he could respond to that backhanded compliment, she was gone, leaving James alone in his office that somehow felt larger and emptier than it had that morning. Lucia emerged from the Harrington building into the cool evening air, her mind replaying the day's events. James Harrington was not what she had expected. Arrogant, yes. Privileged, absolutely. But also undeniably brilliant, with an incisive mind that cut straight to the core of any problem, and occasionally in unguarded moments almost human. The bus stop was crowded with evening commuters, service workers, office staff, students, the everyday people that made the city function. Lucia fit easily among them, despite having spent her day in one of the most exclusive corporate environments in San Francisco. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother, Miguel. How was day one with the corporate overlords? Still have your soul? She smiled, typing back, soul intact. Met the Harrington, both of them, working directly with the son. Miguel's response came quickly. The heir apparent? Isn't he supposed to be a total jerk? Lucia considered this as she boarded the bus, finding a seat near the back. Jury's still out, she wrote back, complicated, more tomorrow, heading to Abuela's. The bus wound through the city, from the gleaming financial district through increasingly diverse neighborhoods, finally reaching the Mission District with its colorful murals and mix of old taquerias and new hipster cafes. Gentrification was slowly transforming the area, but pockets of the community she'd grown up in still remained. Her grandmother's apartment was on the third floor of an aging building that had once been predominantly Latino families, but was now a mix of longtime residents and young tech workers, attracted by the relative affordability and cultural vibrancy. "Abuela, I'm home," Lucia called as she entered, the familiar scent of chilaquiles, her favorite, greeting her. Elena Mendoza emerged from the kitchen, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in its usual bun, her face creased with a smile that reached her still bright eyes. At 67, she moved more slowly than she once had, but her energy remained formidable. "Mija!" she exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron before embracing Lucia. "Tell me everything. How was your first day?" Miguel appeared from his bedroom, his lanky 16-year-old frame filling the doorway. Despite being 6 years younger, he had already outgrown Lucia by several inches. "Did you blow their minds with your genius and make all the rich kids jealous?" Lucia laughed, dropping her bag and sinking onto the worn but comfortable sofa. "Not exactly, but it wasn't bad." "Not bad?" Elena prompted, returning to the kitchen to stir something that smelled delicious. "From you, that's practically a rave review." "I'm working directly with James Harrington," Lucia explained, kicking off her shoes with relief. "The founder's son." "The pretty boy from the magazine covers?" Miguel asked, flopping down beside her. "The one they call Silicon Valley's most eligible bachelor?" Lucia rolled her eyes. "That's the one, though I wouldn't let him hear you call him pretty boy. He takes himself very seriously." "Is he as arrogant as he looks?" Elena called from the kitchen. "Yes," Lucia admitted, "but also, I don't know. There's something else there. He actually had some good ideas about my project. Listened to mine, too." "But praise indeed," Elena said, bringing Lucia a glass of horchata. "And the company? Is it as impressive as they say?" Lucia took a grateful sip of the sweet rice drink. "It's incredible, Abuela. The technology, the resources, they have everything. And the view from our office, you can see the whole bay." "Our office?" Miguel raised an eyebrow. "You're sharing with Mr. Silicon Valley royalty." "Apparently it's some new mentorship initiative," Lucia explained, though she suspected there was more to the story after observing the tension between James and his father. Eleanor studied her granddaughter's face. "And how did they treat you? With respect?" The question carried the weight of Elena's own experiences, decades of working in other people's homes, cleaning their spaces, raising their children, always being seen as less than, despite her intelligence and dignity. "Yes," Lucia said firmly. "The founder himself came to welcome me. He knew all about my project, and James, well, he's complicated, but he treated me like a colleague, not an intern." Elena nodded, satisfied. "Good. They're smart enough to recognize value when they see it. The founder liked my project, Abuela," Lucia continued, excitement creeping into her voice despite her attempt to remain cool. "He specifically mentioned the accessibility aspects." "Of course he did," Eleanor said matter-of-factly. "It's brilliant, just like you." Miguel grinned. Does this mean I get to be your test subject again? Because your last prototype gave me a headache. That's because you were using it to play games instead of reading, Lucia retorted, tossing a cushion at him. Children, Elena scolded without heat. Come eat before it gets cold. As they gathered around the small kitchen table, the same one they'd had for as long as Lucia could remember, she felt the familiar comfort of home wrap around her. Here, she wasn't the scholarship student, or the diversity hire, or the promising intern. She was just Lucia, granddaughter and sister. To your first day, Elena said, raising her glass in a toast. May it be the beginning of everything you've worked for. And to fancy offices with rich white guys who don't know what's about to hit them, Miguel added with a grin. Lucia laughed, clinking her glass against theirs. I'll drink to that. Later, as she helped her grandmother wash dishes, Elena spoke softly. You know, Misha, people like the Harringtons, they're not better than us. They've just had different opportunities. I know, Abuela, Lucia replied, drying a plate. But, Elena continued, her weathered hands steady in the soapy water, don't make the mistake of thinking they're all the same either. Judge this James Harrington by his actions, not his bank account. Lucia considered this. Today he surprised me. I expected complete dismissal, but he actually engaged with my ideas, even built on them. Elena nodded sagely. People are complex. Remember what your abuelo used to say? Everyone has a story you don't know. Lucia recited, smiling at the memory of her grandfather, gone now for 12 years, but still a presence in their lives through his wisdom. Exactly, Eleanor said. Even rich, pretty boys, with perfect teeth. Lucia laughed, bumping her grandmother's shoulder affectionately. His teeth are annoyingly perfect. Just don't let him make you forget who you are and where you come from, Elena cautioned. Your perspective is your power. It's what makes your ideas different from theirs. I won't forget, Lucia promised, her mind drifting back to the moment in James's office when he'd seemed genuinely impressed by her interface design. There had been a flash of something in his eyes, respect perhaps, that had felt more valuable than any polite praise. As she fell asleep that night in her childhood bedroom, now shared with a desk overflowing with textbooks and coding manuals, Lucia replayed the day's interactions, analyzing each exchange with James Harrington. There was something beneath his polished exterior, glimpses of a person more complex than the privileged heir she'd expected. Tomorrow would be interesting. Across the city, in his penthouse apartment overlooking the bay, James Harrington poured himself 2 fingers of 18-year-old Macallan and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights sparkled below, a constellation of human activity that he typically observed with detached appreciation. Tonight, however, his thoughts were elsewhere, specifically on the unexpected challenge that had appeared in his carefully ordered life in the form of Lucia Mendoza. He had anticipated resentment from her, or perhaps excessive eagerness to please. Either would have been easy to manage. Instead, he'd encountered genuine intellect coupled with a directness that few people dared show him anymore. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. How was day 1 with Ms. Mendoza? James stared at the message, considering his response. Finally, he typed, She's competent. Project has potential. 3 dots appeared immediately, followed by his father's reply. High praise from you. See, not all good ideas come from Stanford grads. James felt a flicker of irritation. Never said they did, he responded. Dinner Sunday? Came his father's response, changing the subject. Can't. Singapore projections due Monday, James replied, though the excuse was only partially true. He could have made time for dinner if he'd wanted to. All work and no play, James. His father added a sighing emoji that made James wince. Robert Harrington's attempts to be hip with technology were consistently cringeworthy. James set his phone down without responding, returning to the window and his scotch. Against his will, his mind replayed Lucia's parting comment. Thanks for not being as awful as I feared. He found himself wondering what stories she'd heard about him, what reputation preceded him. He was demanding, yes. Exacting, focused on results. Were those qualities really so awful? The question of what Lucia Mendoza thought of him shouldn't matter. She was a temporary project, a hoop to jump through to satisfy his father's latest whim about succession planning. In 3 months, she'd complete her internship, he'd write her a glowing recommendation, and they'd both move on. So why had he spent the evening thinking about the way her face transformed when she smiled, or the sharp intelligence in her questions, or the quiet dignity with which she'd mentioned her parents' death? James drained his scotch, irritated with himself. This was precisely the kind of emotional distraction he couldn't afford, not with the Singapore expansion at a critical juncture and the board watching his every move. Tomorrow, he would establish clearer boundaries, keep their interactions strictly professional, focus on the business aspects of her project while letting her handle the technical development. Simple, clean, efficient. Yet as he prepared for bed, setting out his suit for the next day with his usual precision, James found himself actually looking forward to morning, a sensation he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. Ridiculous, he muttered to himself, setting his alarm. Lucia Mendoza was just an intern with an interesting project, nothing more. But even as he drifted off to sleep, his mind conjured the image of her knowing smile and the challenging gleam in her eyes when she said, "And what do you value, Mr. Harrington?" A question he still wasn't sure he knew how to answer. "You want me to present to the executive team." Lucia stared at James, certain she had misheard. 2 weeks into her internship, they had fallen into a surprisingly effective working rhythm, but this was unexpected. James nodded, adjusting papers on his immaculate desk. Friday morning. The quarterly innovation showcase. "Your project has progressed faster than anticipated, but that's for senior developers," Lucia protested. "I'm just an intern." James raised an eyebrow. "The prototype you built last week outperformed our professional development team's accessibility standards. False modesty doesn't suit you, Lucia." She blinked at the compliment, still unaccustomed to James's direct manner. "I'm not prepared for that level of scrutiny." "Then we have 48 hours to get you prepared." James checked his watch. "The presentation needs refining. Your technical explanations are too detailed for a C-suite audience." Lucia bristled slightly. "You mean I need to dumb it down?" "I mean, you need to translate," James corrected. "Different audiences require different languages. The executive team doesn't need to understand how the neural network functions. They need to understand why it matters." Over the past 2 weeks, Lucia had discovered that beneath James's arrogant exterior lay a brilliant, strategic mind. Their working relationship remained professional, but had evolved into something approaching mutual respect. She still found him frustratingly privileged and occasionally tone-deaf, but she couldn't deny his business acumen. "Fine," she conceded. "But I want to preserve the accessibility focus. This isn't just about market opportunity." James suppressed a smile. "Wouldn't dream of suggesting otherwise. Let's meet in conference room 3. More space for preparation." As they gathered their materials, Diane appeared at the door. "Mr. Harrington, there's a situation with the Singapore team. They're requesting an emergency call." James frowned. "Schedule it for 4. They're insisting on now, something about regulatory complications." James hesitated, glancing at Lucia, who waved him off. "Go. I can start organizing the presentation structure." "Conference room 3, he reminded her. "I'll join you as soon as I can." As Lucia made her way to the conference room, she reflected on how quickly things had changed. 2 weeks ago, she'd been intimidated by the mere thought of working with James Harrington. Now they were collaborating on a presentation for the company's leadership. Her phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. "How's life with Mr. Perfect Hair?" Lucia smiled, typing back, "Busy, presenting to executives Friday." His response came instantly. "Abuela will flip." The conference room was empty when she arrived. Settling her materials at the large table, Lucia began organizing her notes, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the opportunity. A successful presentation could lead to actual development resources, turning her concept from prototype to product. The door opened and Lucia looked up, expecting James. Instead, Robert Harrington entered, his presence immediately filling the room. "Ms. Mendoza," he said warmly. "Working hard, I see." Lucia stood quickly. "Mr. Harrington." "Yes, sir. I'm preparing for Friday's presentation." "Ah, yes. James mentioned he'd recommended your project." Robert's eyes gleamed with interest. "May I?" He gestured to her notes. "Of course." Lucia watched nervously as the CEO examined her work. After a few moments, Robert looked up. "Tell me, Ms. Mendoza, how are you finding your experience working with my son?" The question felt loaded. "It's been educational," she answered carefully. "James has strong business instincts." Robert smiled slightly. "A diplomatic answer, but I'd appreciate your candor." "This arrangement was unconventional, I know." Lucia hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Initially, I thought he viewed me as an inconvenience, but he's been surprisingly supportive of the project. We don't always agree on approach, but the disagreements have been productive." "Productive disagreements," Robert repeated thoughtfully. "That's rare with James. Most people either blindly agree with him or actively oppose him. Few manage productive middle ground." "We have different perspectives," Lucia explained. "He sees market opportunity where I see human need. Sometimes those align, sometimes they don't. But we're finding the intersections." Robert studied her with increased interest. "And what have you learned from him?" "That good intentions aren't enough," Lucia admitted. "My original proposal would have helped people, but might never have reached them without a viable business model. James helped me see that." "And what do you think he's learned from you?" Robert asked, his tone casual but his gaze intense. The question caught Lucia off guard. I couldn't say, sir." "No?" Robert smiled. "I think you could. You strike me as someone who observes carefully." Lucia considered her words. "I think perhaps he's learning that efficiency isn't always the most important metric, that understanding the human element of a problem can lead to better solutions, not just more complicated ones." Robert's smile broadened. "Exactly what I'd hoped. Thank you, Miss Mendoza." Before Lucia could respond, the door opened again, and James entered, stopping short at the sight of his father. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Just checking in on our rising star," Robert replied smoothly. "Ms. Mendoza was catching me up on your project." James's eyes narrowed slightly. "We have everything under control." "So I see." Robert gathered his things. "I'll leave you to your preparation. Looking forward to Friday, Ms. Mendoza." After he left, James turned to Lucia. "What did he want?" Lucia shrugged, unwilling to share the full conversation. "Just curious about the project." James didn't look convinced, but didn't press further. "Let's get started. The Singapore situation is handled for now, but I only have an hour before my next call." They settled into work, the interaction with Robert lingering in Lucia's mind. There was clearly more to the dynamic between father and son than professional succession planning, but she wasn't sure she wanted to get caught in the middle of whatever game they were playing. Thursday afternoon found them still refining the presentation in James's office. Lucia paced nervously, reciting key points, while James listened critically. "The market potential section feels forced," he commented. "You don't believe those numbers." Lucia stopped pacing. "Because they're overly optimistic. We can't promise 30% adoption rates in the first year. The board responds to ambition, and I respond to honesty," Lucia countered. "I'd rather promise 15% and deliver 20 than the reverse." James considered this, then nodded reluctantly. "Fair point. Revise the projections, but keep the growth curve aggressive for years 2 and 3. Lucia made the note, then collapsed into a chair. "I'm going to embarrass myself tomorrow." James looked up, surprised by her uncharacteristic self-doubt. "Unlikely." You know this material better than anyone. It's not the material I'm worried about, it's... She hesitated. I've never presented to a room full of executives before. People like me don't usually get these opportunities. People like you? Community college transfers, scholarship kids, people from the Mission District. She shrugged, uncomfortable with the admission of vulnerability. James was quiet for a moment. The first time I presented to the board, I was 22, fresh MBA, wanting to prove myself. I spent weeks preparing, memorized every number. And I bombed spectacularly, he said with surprising candor. Froze up, forgot half my slides, answered a basic question completely wrong. Lucia stared at him. You're making that up. I wish I were. The corner of his mouth quirked up. My father still brings it up at family dinners. What happened afterward? I went back to my office, considered changing my name and moving to another country, James said dryly. Then I scheduled another presentation for the next meeting, did better, then better again the next time. Lucia studied him. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow isn't a test you pass or fail, James said. It's an opportunity to get better at something difficult. And because I've seen your work, you're more prepared than I was. The unexpected encouragement warmed her. Thanks. That actually helps. Don't get used to it, James replied, his usual crisp tone returning. Now let's go through the financial projections again. Your ROI timeline still needs work. As they returned to the presentation, Lucia found herself seeing James in a new light. The glimpse of vulnerability, of a young man desperately trying to prove himself, humanized him in a way their previous interactions hadn't. Perhaps there was more beneath the polished surface than she'd initially thought. Friday morning arrived with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Lucia had spent hours practicing at home, Miguel and her grandmother serving as a mock audience, until Elena had finally ordered her to bed, insisting that sleep was more important than one more rehearsal. She arrived at Harrington Innovations early, wearing her best outfit, a navy blue suit with a silk blouse she'd found at a consignment shop. Professional, but not trying too hard. James was already in the office, looking impeccable as always in a tailored charcoal suit. Ready? He asked without preamble. As I'll ever be, Lucia replied, attempting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. They walked together to the executive conference room, James briefing her on last-minute details. My father will sit at the head of the table. CFO to his right, he'll ask about cost projections. CTO to his left. She's supportive of accessibility initiatives, but demands technical rigor. You don't have to babysit me, Lucia said, though she appreciated the insider information. Not babysitting. Strategic preparation. James paused outside the conference room. One more thing. The board doesn't know I've been working with you on this. My father specifically requested I not mention my involvement. Lucia frowned. Why? Part of his test, James said cryptically. Just present it as your project. I'll be there, but I won't say anything unless directly asked. Before Lucia could question this further, the door opened and Jennifer Chen greeted them. Perfect timing, everyone's ready. The conference room contained the entire executive team, 12 people whose combined net worth probably exceeded the GDP of a small country. Robert Harrington nodded encouragingly as Lucia took her position at the front of the room. Taking a deep breath, she began. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'm here to introduce an adaptive learning interface designed to revolutionize educational accessibility for students with processing disorders. As she moved through the presentation, Lucia found her nervousness transforming into the familiar passion that had driven the project from the beginning. She explained the technical framework in terms the executives could understand, highlighted the market opportunity with James's carefully calibrated projections, and demonstrated the working prototype with the confidence of someone who believed completely in her creation. The questions that followed were probing but fair. The CFO questioned the development costs. The CTO asked about scalability. The CMO wanted to know about potential partnerships with educational institutions. Throughout it all, James remained silent, watching from the side of the room. Occasionally, their eyes would meet, and Lucia would find unexpected reassurance in his steady gaze. Finally, Robert Harrington asked the most important question. "If we green-light this project, Ms. Mendoza, what resources would you need to move forward?" Lucia had prepared for this. A dedicated development team of 4 engineers for 6 months, access to the company's educational technology infrastructure, and a pilot program partnership with at least 3 school districts of varying socioeconomic profiles to ensure the solution works for all students, not just those with the most resources. Robert glanced briefly at James, then back to Lucia. "Ambitious for an intern." "Yes, sir," Lucia agreed without apology, "but the potential impact justifies the investment." After a moment of silence, Robert smiled. "I agree. Jennifer, please work with Ms. Mendoza to allocate the resources she's requested. We'll review progress in 1 month." Just like that, it was over. Success. As the executives filed out, offering congratulatory comments, Lucia found herself momentarily overwhelmed. James approached, hands in his pockets. "Well done. Although you went off script on the implementation timeline, it felt right in the moment," Lucia admitted. "Too bold." "Bold was exactly what was needed," James said, surprising her again. "You read the room perfectly." Before Lucia could respond, Robert joined them. "Impressive presentation, Ms. Mendoza. You've earned this opportunity." "Thank you, sir." "Dean and James," Robert continued, "your contribution didn't go unnoticed, though you stayed quiet as instructed." James stiffened slightly. "The project is Lucia's. I merely provided some business context." "Indeed," Robert's expression was unreadable. "Well, I believe this calls for a celebration. The rooftop gathering starts at 4. I expect to see you both there." After he left, Lucia turned to James. "I thought he didn't know you were involved." "My father knows everything that happens in this building," James said with resignation. "It's part of what makes him both a brilliant CEO and an infuriating parent." Lucia laughed, the tension of the morning finally breaking. "Well, partner, we did it. My idea, your business strategy. Not a bad combination." Something flickered in James's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at being called a partner. "We should review the implementation plan before the celebration. If we're moving forward, there's a lot to organize." "Always working," Lucia teased. "Fine. But afterward, I'm having at least 1 glass of champagne. I've earned it." "Yes," James agreed with unexpected sincerity. "You certainly have." As they walked back to the office, Lucia realized how much had changed in just 2 weeks. What had begun as an awkward, forced collaboration had evolved into something neither of them had expected. A partnership that somehow balanced his practical business sense with her innovative vision. For the first time since starting at Harrington Innovations, she felt like she truly belonged there. And judging by the almost smile on James's usually serious face, perhaps he was starting to see the value in their unlikely alliance as well. The rooftop garden of Harrington Innovations was transformed in the golden light of late afternoon. String lights hung between artfully arranged planters, and the San Francisco skyline provided a backdrop that even the most jaded employees couldn't ignore. Lucia stood by the railing, taking in the view while clutching a glass of champagne. Quite a difference from the Mission District, huh? She turned to find James beside her, his own glass untouched. In the month since her presentation, their working relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and complementary skills. "Different but not better," Lucia replied. "Just different." James studied her profile as she gazed at the city. "Your project's development team starts Monday. You should be proud." "We should be proud," she corrected. "It wouldn't have happened without you." "False modesty doesn't become you," he said, echoing words from weeks earlier. "Your presentation won the board over, not my input." Their conversation was interrupted by Jennifer Chen, who approached with a tall, elegantly dressed woman. Lucia, there's someone you should meet. This is Victoria Lang, Head of Product Development. As Lucia engaged in conversation, James drifted away, watching from across the rooftop. His father sidled up beside him. She's making quite an impression, Robert observed. James nodded, watching Lucia animatedly explain something to Victoria. She's good with people. Unlike some, Robert said pointedly. James bristled. Is this where you tell me how much I've learned from the experience? How working with someone from a different background has broadened my horizons? Actually, Robert replied, I was going to ask if you figured out why I really paired you two together. James frowned. To teach me humility and people skills. You've made that abundantly clear. Robert chuckled. That was part of it, but I also paired you together because you complement each other perfectly. Your business acumen with her innovation. Your strategic thinking with her user focus. He paused. You're a stronger team than either of you would be alone. Before James could respond, Robert patted his shoulder. Just something to consider when you're thinking about the future of this company. With that cryptic remark, he walked away. Across the rooftop, Lucia excused herself from the conversation and headed toward the bar for a water. The champagne had gone to her head slightly, not enough to be unprofessional, but enough to feel a pleasant warmth spreading through her. The woman of the hour, said a voice behind her. She turned to find Arjun Patel smiling at her. Hardly, Lucia demurred, but the project is moving forward, which is what matters. The development team is excited, Arjun confirmed. I'm actually hosting a small gathering at my place tomorrow. Just a few engineers and designers. You should come. Could be good to connect with your new team informally. I'd like that, Lucia said, genuinely pleased at the invitation. Great. Here's the address. Arjun handed her a card. Around 8, bring anyone you like. James appeared beside them, his timing suspiciously perfect. Patel, enjoying the party? Just inviting Lucia to a get-together tomorrow? You're welcome too, of course, Arjun added, though his tone suggested the invitation was merely polite. Thanks, James said neutrally. I'll check my calendar. After Arjun left, Lucia raised an eyebrow at James. You don't have to accept just to be polite. I know social gatherings with the engineering team aren't your thing. How would you know what my thing is? James challenged. Lucia laughed. Because in the 5 weeks I've known you, you've never once mentioned friends or social plans. You work, you go home, you come back to work. I have interests outside the office, James protested. Name one. He hesitated just long enough to prove her point. I sail. Alone, I'm guessing. James's silence was answer enough, and Lucia shook her head in mock dismay. Come to Arjun's tomorrow. It would be good for you to connect with the team as a person, not just an executive. I'll consider it, James said, which they both knew meant no. Saturday evening found Lucia standing outside Arjun's Pacific Heights condo, feeling slightly out of place. She'd invited Miguel to join her, partly for moral support, partly because her brother had an interest in engineering and could benefit from the connections. This place is insane, Miguel whispered as they were welcomed inside. Arjun's home was indeed impressive, minimalist but warm, with stunning views and art that probably cost more than their grandmother's apartment. About 20 people mingled throughout the space, mostly Harrington employees, with a few significant others. Lucia, you made it, Arjun greeted them warmly. And this is? My brother, Miguel, Lucia introduced. He's interested in engineering. Excellent. Let me introduce you to some people who can bore you with technical talk all night, Arjun said good-naturedly, leading Miguel away. Lucia circulated, connecting with members of her newly assigned development team in a relaxed setting. She was deep in conversation about user interface design when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway, causing a subtle shift in the room's energy. James Harrington stood awkwardly in the entrance, looking simultaneously immaculate in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, and completely out of place among the more casual engineers. You came, Lucia said, unable to hide her surprise as she approached him. I said I'd consider it, he replied, glancing around with barely concealed discomfort. And yet I'm still shocked, she teased. Come on, I'll introduce you to people. And yes, you can call them by their first names. The world won't end. James followed her with reluctance. I know my employees' names. Knowing names and connecting with people are different skills, Lucia pointed out, guiding him toward a group that included 2 of their development team members. To Lucia's surprise, James made an effort. He asked questions about their backgrounds, listened to technical explanations without interrupting, and even managed a self-deprecating joke about his limited coding abilities. The tension in his shoulders gradually eased as the evening progressed. Later, they found themselves alone on Arjun's balcony, the city lights spread before them like fallen stars. Admit it, Lucia said, leaning against the railing. This wasn't terrible. It wasn't terrible, James conceded. Your brother is impressive. He was discussing quantum computing applications with our senior architects. He's brilliant, Lucia agreed. Just needs opportunities. Like the ones you've created for him, James observed. You mentioned he's applying to colleges. Lucia nodded, surprised by his interest. Berkeley and Stanford, though the latter is a long shot financially, even with scholarships. James was quiet for a moment. There's a Harrington Foundation scholarship for exceptional students from underrepresented backgrounds. It covers full tuition plus expenses. Lucia stared at him. Are you suggesting... I'm on the selection committee, James said simply. He should apply. Based on what I saw tonight, he'd be competitive. The gesture left Lucia momentarily speechless. Thank you, she finally managed. That's unexpectedly kind of you. James looked almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. It's not kindness. It's recognizing potential. They fell into comfortable silence, watching the fog roll in across the bay. Why did you really come tonight? Lucia asked eventually. James considered her question. Curiosity. I wanted to see what you're like outside the office. And, am I different? No, he said thoughtfully. You're remarkably consistent. The same intelligence, the same directness. But more what? Relaxed, he decided. You laugh more. Maybe you're just funnier outside the office, Lucia suggested with a smile. James's expression softened. Maybe I am. The moment lingered between them, charged with something neither was prepared to name. Lucia became acutely aware of his proximity, of the way the city lights reflected in his eyes. Lucia! Miguel's voice broke the spell as he joined them on the balcony. Arjun's ordering food. Oh, hey, Mr. Harrington. Didn't expect to see you here. James, he corrected. Outside the office, it's just James. Miguel grinned. Cool. Hey, thanks for talking to those engineers. They gave me their cards and everything. They recognized a kindred spirit, James said, surprising both Mendozas with the easy compliment. I was just telling your sister you should apply for the Harrington Foundation scholarship. Miguel's eyes widened. For real? That would be... Wow. Don't get too excited, Lucia cautioned. It's still a competitive process. But a worthwhile one, James added. I should go. Early meeting tomorrow. He extended his hand to Miguel. Good to see you again. Apply for that scholarship. To Lucia, he simply nodded, something unspoken passing between them. See you Monday. After he left, Miguel turned to his sister with raised eyebrows. So that's the arrogant heir apparent. Seems pretty decent to me. Lucia watched James's retreating figure. He's complicated. And definitely into you, Miguel added casually. What? Don't be ridiculous, Lucia protested too quickly. We work together, that's all. Miguel gave her a knowing look. Sure, sis, whatever you say. Monday morning brought a return to routine, but something had shifted. The comfortable professional rhythm they'd established now had an undercurrent of awareness that hadn't been there before. They worked together on the project implementation, meeting with developers, refining the roadmap. Their usual dynamic of productive disagreement and eventual consensus continued, but with new moments of connection, a shared glance of understanding during meetings. James bringing coffee made exactly how she liked it, Lucia staying late to help him prepare for a board update. Small things that neither acknowledged explicitly, but both recognized as a change. 2 weeks after Arjun's party, they were working late in James's office, takeout containers pushed to one side as they reviewed the project timeline. "We're behind on the voice recognition component," Lucia noted, rubbing her tired eyes. "The accuracy for accented English isn't where it needs to be." "We could push back the pilot launch," James suggested. Lucia shook her head. "The school year timing is crucial. We need to launch before the fall semester." She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Maybe we could restructure the dev team resources. Pull someone from the UI team temporarily? Not without compromising the user experience," James countered. He hesitated, then offered, "I could bring in consultants from my Singapore team. They've done advanced work in multilingual voice processing. That would be amazing. But isn't the Singapore expansion your priority right now? Your father mentioned the board is watching that project closely." James shrugged. "I can manage both. This project matters too." Lucia studied him curiously. "Why do you care so much about this?" "Initially you saw it as a distraction, my project that you were forced to mentor." "Things change," James said simply. "I've seen what this could become, how it could help students like your brother. It's worth the investment." "You've changed," Lucia observed. "Have I? When we met, you talked about efficiency and results. Now you talk about impact and helping people." James considered this. "Perhaps I just needed someone to remind me why results matter in the first place." His eyes met hers. "You've changed too, you know." "How so?" "You're more strategic, less defensive about compromises that serve the greater goal. You've learned to play the corporate game without losing your principles." Lucia smiled. "I had a good teacher." "We both did," James replied quietly. The moment stretched between them, the office silent except for the distant sounds of the city. James's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question forming that neither was ready to ask. Lucia broke the tension, standing abruptly. "It's late, I should go." "I'll drive you home," James offered, rising as well. "You don't have to do that." "It's almost midnight," he pointed out. "The buses are infrequent and less safe at this hour." Too tired to argue, Lucia acquiesced. "All right, thank you." The drive to the Mission District was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. James's sleek Audi seemed out of place as they pulled up to her grandmother's apartment building. "Thank you for the ride," Lucia said, hand on the door handle. "Lucia," James began, then hesitated. "I've been thinking about what happens when your internship ends next month." Her heart skipped. "Oh? You should apply for a permanent position, head of accessibility initiatives. I've already spoken to HR about creating the role." "You have?" Lucia was genuinely surprised. James nodded. "The company needs your perspective, your talent. And you. Do you need my perspective?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. In the dim light of the car, his expression was difficult to read. "I think I've come to rely on it more than I expected." The admission hung between them, laden with implications neither was prepared to address. "I should go," Lucia said softly. "My grandmother will be worried." "Of course." James nodded, professional once more. "I'll see you tomorrow." Lucia stepped out of the car, turning back briefly. "James, thank you for everything." He offered a small smile. "Good night, Lucia." As she watched his car disappear down the street, Lucia acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. Against all logic and her better judgment, she was falling for James Harrington. And based on the way he'd looked at her tonight, the feeling might just be mutual, which made everything infinitely more complicated. The launch party for the Access Learn pilot program transformed the Harrington Innovations Lobby into a showcase of technology and education. School administrators, teachers and students from the 3 participating districts mingled with company executives and press. At the center of it all stood Lucia, explaining the program to an enthusiastic group of educators. The interface adapts in real time to each student's specific needs, she demonstrated on a tablet. For dyslexic students, it adjusts text spacing and font. For those with ADHD, it modifies content delivery pacing. From across the room, James watched with undisguised pride. The 2 months since their late-night drive had been filled with intense work preparing for this launch, both of them carefully maintaining professional boundaries, while their unspoken attraction simmered beneath the surface. "She's remarkable," Robert Harrington said, appearing beside his son. "You made an excellent choice recommending her for the permanent position." "She earned it," James replied simply. Robert studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when I paired you two together, I expected you to learn something about perspective. I didn't anticipate you'd develop feelings for her." James stiffened. "That's not—" "Please," Robert interrupted. "I've known you your entire life. I recognize that look." His tone softened. "Just be careful, son. Office relationships are complicated enough without adding the power dynamics at play here." Before James could respond, they were interrupted by Jennifer Chen. "Mr. Harrington, the press is ready for the formal announcement." Robert nodded. "James, why don't you join Lucia at the podium? This is your shared success after all." The announcement went smoothly, with Robert praising the initiative and its potential impact. Lucia spoke passionately about educational access, and James outlined the implementation strategy. They functioned as a perfect team, completing each other's thoughts and highlighting different aspects of the program. Afterward, as the event wound down, James found Lucia speaking with a teenage boy who was enthusiastically showing her something on the prototype. "It actually makes sense now," the boy was saying. "Like I can focus on what it's saying instead of trying to figure out the words." Lucia beamed. "That's exactly what we designed it to do. Thanks for testing it for us, Jason." As the boy left with his teacher, James approached. "Successful launch. The board is impressed. The real test will be the classroom implementation," Lucia replied, though her smile betrayed her satisfaction. "But yes, it feels good to see it actually helping." "Drinks to celebrate?" James suggested. "The team is heading to Watershed." Lucia hesitated. "Actually, my grandmother is hosting a dinner tonight. The whole family's coming to celebrate my permanent position." She paused, then added, "You could join us if you'd like." James looked surprised by the invitation. "I wouldn't want to impose on a family celebration." "It wouldn't be an imposition," Lucia assured him. "Miguel keeps asking when he'll see you again to discuss that scholarship application." After a moment's consideration, James nodded. "I'd like that." "Thank you." Elena Mendoza's apartment was filled with the aromas of traditional Mexican cooking and the sounds of family celebration when they arrived. Lucia had texted ahead to warn her grandmother about their additional guest, but nothing could have prepared James for the warm chaos of the Mendoza household. "Mija!" Elena exclaimed, embracing Lucia before turning curious eyes to James. "And this must be the famous Mr. Harrington." "Please call me James," he said, extending his hand, which Eleanor ignored in favor of a brief hug that left him momentarily stunned. "Any friend of Lucia's is welcome here," she declared. "Come, sit. The food is almost ready." The small apartment was crowded with relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, all curious about Lucia's mysterious colleague. Miguel immediately engaged James in conversation about his scholarship application, while others peppered him with questions about the company and his work with Lucia. To her surprise, James adapted remarkably well. His initial stiffness gradually melted away as he helped set the table, accepted a beer from her uncle, and even laughed at her cousin's terrible jokes. In this humble apartment, so far removed from his usual environment, he seemed more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Your family is wonderful," James said quietly when they had a moment alone in the kitchen. where Lucia was helping her grandmother with dessert. "They're a lot," Lucia acknowledged with affection. "Too much sometimes." "No," James disagreed. "They're exactly right. There's so much life here." Something in his tone made Lucia look at him more closely. "What was your family like growing up?" James's expression turned contemplative. "Quiet. Orderly. My mother died when I was 8. After that, it was just my father and me in that big house. He worked constantly. I had nannies, tutors, the best of everything except actual family dinners like this." The glimpse into his childhood explained so much about him. "I'm sorry about your mother." James shrugged slightly. "It was a long time ago." He glanced around the warm kitchen. "Your grandmother is amazing. Raising you and Miguel after your parents died couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," Lucia agreed. "She worked cleaning houses during the day and a restaurant at night for years. But she never made us feel her struggle. She made sure we had books, opportunities, love." "She succeeded," James said, his eyes meeting Lucia's with unmistakable admiration. "You're a proof of that." The moment was interrupted by Eleanor returning to check on the flan. "Ah, you two talking business even at a party," she teased, though her perceptive eyes missed nothing. "Actually," James said, "Lucia was just explaining how you're the secret to her success, Mrs. Mendoza." Elena laughed. "Such charm! Now I see why my granddaughter speaks of you so often." "Abuela!" Lucia protested, feeling her cheeks warm. "What? It's true," Elena said innocently, winking at James. "Come, help me serve dessert." Throughout the evening, Lucia caught James watching her interactions with her family, the easy affection, the teasing, the shared stories. Each time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, deepening their connection beyond the professional relationship they'd maintained. As the night wound down and relatives began to leave, James helped clean up despite Elena's protests. When only the immediate family remained, Miguel pulled out a guitar and began playing, his talent evident in the complex melodies. "Your brother is gifted," James observed as they stepped onto the small balcony for a moment of quiet. "In many ways," Lucia agreed, leaning against the railing. "Thank you for coming tonight. I know this isn't your usual scene." "Nah, I've enjoyed it more than any corporate event I can remember," James admitted. "Your family treats me like a person, not a Harrington." "Because that's who you are to us," Lucia said simply. "Just James." The music from inside provided a gentle backdrop as they stood together in the cool evening air. James turned to face her, his expression serious. "Lucia, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. These past months working together, they've changed me. You've changed me." Her heart raced at his words. "James, please, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I've spent my life focused on ambition, achievement, the Harrington legacy. But you've shown me there's more to success than profit margins and market share. There's impact, purpose, connection." He took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I find myself thinking about you when we're not together, wondering what you'd say about a decision, how you'd approach a problem. It's become difficult to maintain professional boundaries." "I know," Lucia admitted softly. "I've felt it too." James reached out, his fingers gently brushing hers. "I don't want to complicate your career. Your position at the company is based entirely on your merit, and I would never want anyone to question that." "But," Lucia prompted, hardly daring to breathe. "But I can't keep pretending there isn't something happening between us," James finished, his voice low and sincere. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Before Lucia could respond, Elena called from inside. "Mija, your cousin Anna is leaving." The interruption broke the moment. James stepped back, his professional mask slipping back into place. "We should go back in." Lucia nodded, though everything inside her wanted to continue the conversation. "We'll talk later." Okay. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of goodbyes and thank yous. When James finally left, promising Miguel he'd review his scholarship essay personally, Lucia felt both relief and regret. They'd crossed a line tonight, acknowledging feelings they'd both been suppressing. What came next would inevitably change everything. Monday morning brought unexpected chaos. Lucia arrived at the office to find James in a tense phone conversation, his expression darker than she'd seen in months. "I don't care what regulatory hurdles they're citing," he was saying. "We had approvals in place. This feels like deliberate sabotage." He acknowledged her presence with a brief nod as she settled at her desk, trying not to eavesdrop but unable to ignore his obvious distress. "No, I need to handle this personally," he continued. "Book the flight for tonight. I'll be there tomorrow morning." He hung up, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Singapore problems?" Lucia ventured. James nodded grimly. "Major setback with the expansion. Someone filed last-minute regulatory objections that could delay us by months. That's the project your father mentioned the board is watching closely. The one that's supposed to secure my position as the next CEO," James confirmed. "I need to go there immediately and sort this out." "How long will you be gone?" Lucia asked, trying to keep her tone neutral despite her disappointment. After their almost confession on the balcony, she'd hoped they'd have time to explore what was developing between them. "A week, maybe 2. James hesitated. "About Saturday night?" Lucia shook her head. "Not now. You have more important things to focus on." "This doesn't change anything," James insisted, moving closer. "What I said, what I almost said, I meant it." "I know," Lucia assured him. "And it'll still be true when you get back. Go save your Singapore project. We'll figure out the rest when you return." James studied her face, seeming to search for confirmation she truly meant this. "I'll call when I can, and the Access Learn implementation meetings, I can handle them," Lucia assured him. "That's why you hired me, remember? My expertise, not just my pretty face." The joke drew a reluctant smile. "I never said you had a pretty face." "It was implied," Lucia teased. Their easy banter restored, James gathered his things to prepare for the trip. "I'll be back as soon as possible." "I'll be here," Lucia promised. As he left, Lucia felt a strange premonition that their carefully constructed world was about to change in ways neither could anticipate. 5 days into James's absence, Lucia was reviewing teacher feedback from the Access Learn pilot when Robert Harrington appeared at her door. "Ms. Mendoza, do you have a moment?" "Of course, sir," Lucia said, surprised by the unexpected visit. "Please, come in." Robert settled into the chair across from her desk, James's desk, technically, though she'd been using it in his absence. "How is the pilot program progressing?" he asked. "Very well," Lucia reported. "Initial feedback is overwhelmingly positive. We're already identifying improvements for the next version." Robert nodded, though his expression suggested he had something else on his mind. "And have you heard from James recently?" "Yesterday, briefly," Lucia answered carefully. "He mentioned making progress with the regulatory issues." "Yes, he's been quite focused," Robert agreed, "which is why I was surprised to receive these." He placed a tablet on the desk, open to what appeared to be a gossip blog. Lucia's stomach dropped as she saw the headline, "Harrington heir finding love in the mailroom. Sources say CFO is romancing diversity, hire intern." Beneath the inflammatory headline were photos. James and Lucia working late in the office, leaving together the night he'd driven her home, standing close on her grandmother's balcony. Nothing explicit, nothing compromising, but together they painted a suggestive picture. "This is," Lucia began, her voice faltering. "Problematic," Robert finished. "Not because there would be anything wrong with a relationship between consenting adults, but because of the narrative it creates. A narrative that undermines everything you've worked for, Ms. Mendoza." Lucia felt sick. These photos, they're being taken out of context. "Perhaps," Robert conceded, "but perception matters in business. Already I've heard whispers questioning whether your permanent position was earned or bestowed as a favor." "That's ridiculous," Lucia protested. "My work speaks for itself." To those who take the time to examine it, yes, Robert agreed. But many won't. They'll see what these photos suggest. A powerful executive and his much younger female subordinate. An old story that does neither of you credit. Lucia's mind raced, considering implications she'd been avoiding for months. What are you suggesting? Robert's expression softened slightly. I'm not here to dictate your personal life, Lucia. I value your contributions to this company enormously, but I also want to protect both you and my son from unnecessary complications. You think I'm a complication, Lucia stated flatly. I think timing matters, Robert corrected. James is at a critical juncture in his career. The Singapore expansion will determine his readiness to lead this company. And you've just begun establishing yourself as a respected innovator in your field. He leaned forward. Consider whether this is the right moment to jeopardize either of those trajectories. The implication was clear, however delicately phrased. Robert believed a relationship between them would damage both their careers, but particularly hers. Have you spoken to James about this? Lucia asked. Not yet, Robert admitted. He has enough to manage in Singapore at present. I thought it best to discuss this with you first, as you seem to be the more pragmatic of the two. The compliment, if it was one, did little to soften the blow. Lucia stared at the tablet, at the sensationalized story, reducing her professional accomplishments to a romantic subplot in James Harrington's life. I understand your concern, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. And I appreciate your directness. Robert nodded, rising from the chair. You're an extraordinary talent, Lucia. Your future at this company is bright, on your own merits. I'd hate to see that overshadowed by gossip and speculation. After he left, Lucia sat motionless, the tablet still displaying the damning article. Everything Robert had said made logical sense. A relationship with James would invite exactly the kind of scrutiny and doubt she'd fought against her entire career. People would always wonder if she'd earned her position or slept her way into it. And for James, entangling himself with an employee just as he was positioning himself to take over the company could be seen as evidence of poor judgment. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Breakthrough with regulators. Should be home in 3 days. We need to talk. Lucia stared at the message, her heart and mind at war. 3 days to decide whether to pursue what was growing between them or to protect the career she'd worked so hard to build. 3 days to choose between her heart and her future. You're avoiding me, James stated, as he entered the conference room where Lucia was reviewing data with her team. 2 days had passed since his return from Singapore, during which Lucia had managed to be unavailable for any private conversations through a combination of carefully scheduled meetings and legitimate work demands. I'm busy, she replied coolly. Your father approved an expansion of the Access Learn program. Congratulations. Now can we talk privately? Her team exchanged curious glances before Lucia dismissed them with a nod. When they were alone, James closed the door. What's going on, Lucia? I've been trying to see you since I got back. She took a deep breath. I saw the article, the photos. Understanding dawned in his eyes. That gossip blog nonsense. Is that what this is about? Your father showed it to me, Lucia admitted. He was concerned about the implications. James's expression hardened. Of course he was. And let me guess. He suggested that any relationship between us would damage our careers, particularly yours. He wasn't wrong, Lucia said quietly. People are already questioning whether I earn my position. Who cares what people think? James demanded. We know the truth. That's easy for you to say, Lucia retorted, frustration breaking through. You're James Harrington. Your place was secured at birth. I'm fighting for every inch of respect in this industry. That's not fair, he protested. I've worked. I know you have, Lucia interrupted, but you've never had to wonder if your accomplishments were being attributed to anything other than your abilities. I have, every single day. James fell silent, the truth of her words sinking in. So that's it? We just pretend there's nothing between us because of what others might say? The pain in his voice nearly broke her resolve. I didn't work this hard to become a footnote in someone else's story, James. The intern who caught the heir's attention. I deserve more than that. You do, he agreed softly. But I thought what we were building meant something to you. It did. It does. Lucia looked away. But timing matters. Your father was right about that. James moved closer. Look at me, Lucia, please. She met his gaze, seeing the genuine emotion there. I love you, he said simply. I wasn't planning to, but it happened, and I think you feel the same. The words she'd both longed for and dreaded hung between them. James, if you tell me you don't feel anything, I'll respect that, he continued. But don't push me away because of what others might think. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. The Access Learn server had crashed in one of the pilot schools during testing. I have to go, she said, grateful for the interruption. This isn't finished, James warned as she gathered her things. I know, Lucia acknowledged, but right now my work needs me. The technical crisis consumed the next 3 days. Lucia working alongside the development team to identify and fix the problem. James kept his distance professionally, though his presence in meetings was a constant reminder of their unresolved situation. On the 4th day, exhausted but triumphant after restoring the system, Lucia returned to her office to find Robert Harrington waiting. Ms. Mendoza, I hear you've salvaged the situation admirably. Thank you, sir, she replied warily. The team worked around the clock. And you led them effectively, Robert noted. Which confirms what I already knew. You're exactly what this company needs. Something in his tone put Lucia on alert. I appreciate your confidence. Robert smiled. In fact, I've been so impressed with your performance that I'd like to offer you a significant opportunity. Our Boston office is launching an educational technology division, and I want you to lead it. Lucia stared at him in shock. Boston? It's a substantial promotion, Robert continued. Higher salary, director-level position, your own team. You'd report directly to me. The offer was extraordinary, a career leap that would normally take years to achieve, yet its timing was suspicious. May I ask why Boston? The Access Learn program is headquartered here. Strategic diversification, Robert replied smoothly. The East Coast educational market has unique needs. And it's 3,000 miles from San Francisco, Lucia observed. From James. Robert's expression remained neutral. The distance would certainly minimize any appearance of impropriety, yes. The truth revealed itself clearly. This wasn't a promotion. It was a solution to a problem. Her. With all due respect, sir, Lucia said, finding her courage, I didn't earn my position here through any relationship with your son. I won't have my career path determined by it either. I'm offering you an opportunity many would envy, Robert reminded her, based on my talent or your desire to separate me from James. Does it matter if the result benefits your career? Lucia considered the question seriously. Yes, she finally said. It matters to me. Before Robert could respond, James appeared in the doorway, having overheard their conversation. It matters to me too, Dad. Robert sighed. James, this doesn't concern... Trying to ship Lucia across the country doesn't concern me. James interrupted, anger evident in his voice. Manipulating her career to manage what you see as a problem. I'm trying to protect both of you, Robert insisted. The board approved the Singapore expansion yesterday, James cut in. The project that was supposed to prove my readiness. We exceeded targets despite the setbacks. Yes, and I'm proud of that accomplishment, Robert acknowledged. Then trust me to make my own decisions, James insisted, personal and professional. Robert looked between them, his expression softening slightly. You're both exceptional talents. I don't want to see that potential compromised by complications that could be avoided. Some complications are worth embracing, Lucia said quietly. That's what innovation is, finding value in the unexpected. Robert studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps you're right, Miss Mendoza." He turned to James. "The offer for Boston stands, but as a genuine opportunity, not an ultimatum. Consider it, both of you." After he left, James turned to Lucia. "I would never ask you to choose between your career and us." Lucia finished for him. "Is there an us?" James asked, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Lucia took a deep breath. "I've spent the past week thinking about all the reasons this is complicated. The professional dynamics, the public perception, the different worlds we come from." James waited, tension visible in every line of his body. "But then I realized something," she continued. "The most important innovations happen at intersection points, where different perspectives meet and create something new, something neither could have created alone." She moved closer to him. "That's us, James. We're better together than apart. We make each other more than we were before." Relief and joy transformed his face. "So you're saying—" "I'm saying I love you too," Lucia admitted, finally giving voice to the truth she'd been fighting. "And I'm not going to Boston unless you're coming with me." James pulled her into his arms, their first embrace after months of careful distance. "I hear Boston's lovely in the fall," he murmured against her hair. Lucia laughed, the tension of the past weeks dissolving. "We're really doing this, defying conventional wisdom, corporate politics, your father. And gossip blogs," James added with a smile. "Don't forget those." "How could I?" Lucia teased, then grew serious. "It won't be easy. People will talk." "Let them," James said simply. "We know the truth. That's what matters." As they stood together in the office where they'd first met as reluctant colleagues, Lucia marveled at the journey they'd taken, from mutual wariness to respect to something neither had expected to find. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I started this internship, I thought you were the most arrogant, entitled person I'd ever met. And I thought you were just another charity case hire to improve our diversity statistics," James admitted sheepishly. "We were both wrong," Lucia said, smiling up at him. "Spectacularly wrong," James agreed, drawing her closer. "And I've never been happier to be wrong in my life." Their lips met in a kiss that had been months in the making, tentative at first, then deepening as they finally gave themselves permission to express what they'd been feeling. When they finally drew apart, James rested his forehead against hers. "So, Boston? Let's discuss it," Lucia suggested. "Weigh the professional opportunities, the personal implications. Make a decision together." "Together," James repeated as if testing the word. "I like the sound of that." "Me too," Lucia agreed, knowing that whatever path they chose, they would walk it side by side, two different perspectives creating something neither could have imagined alone.